Summer anime season is officially here at last, and it is juicy, guys. It is juicy and meaty and protein filled goodness. Starting with Chainsmoker Cat. Now, okay, Chainsmoker Cat, here's the thing. Basically, the best way I can pitch this particular anime is if you like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, you will like this. You will laugh because it is the same, pretty much the exact same type of dark comedy. You know, much like that show, you have a bunch of degenerate characters that are just kind of terrible. um, Everybody in this show has like some kind of all the cat girls anyway have an addiction of some kind or kind of like hooked on something. Our main protagonist, Yanni the cat girl, is just an extreme smoker. Like unlike smoking with the supermarket, or behind the supermarket, whatever that show's called. Unlike that show, which depicts it in a very sweet, kind of harmless way. This one does not. Like Yanni is just a major league smokeaholic. She's just a nicotine fiend, and she's also just very trashy. Her apartment is just littered with cigarette butts everywhere and everything, and she doesn't pay very often. She's always behind on her rent. She's just a slacker junkie, essentially, and nothing gets done. She doesn't hold down a job or anything. Um, and while we've all probably met people like this, um, Yachty is nevertheless taken to such an extreme that like nobody could be as bad as this character. Nobody out there can match Yanni when it comes to uh, junky slackerness, and her neighbors are just as bad in their own ways. Like the other characters we meet, Yaku, her next door neighbor, is into all kinds of hard drugs that is like even worse. And but unlike Yanni, who just kind of goes through life not thinking about how terrible things have gotten, uh, Yaku, her neighbor, is just constantly stricken with guilt at her catgirl degeneracy. How far she's fallen from grace ever since meeting this character Yanni and becoming friends with her. And then you have another catgirl neighbor named Hamiko, who is not a junkie in the conventional sense, like her two friends, but she is a terminally online live streamer who's obsessed with live streaming and a rage gamer as well. Uh, and is also quite degenerate for just being around these characters all the time and hanging out with them constantly. So like yeah, there's a scene where she's like literally doing a live stream from a toilet. So like all these catgirl characters, in anime, catgirls are usually just like the cutest, most adorable archetypes. And part of just what is inherently funny about this show is the very idea of taking catgirls and just making them as degenerate as possible. um, yeah, so very, very like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia for me vibes of like dark, degenerate comedy. And a lot of people are talking about the opening intro, how it references like a billion different live action movies. It's one of the coolest freaking intros I've seen for an anime in a long time, probably since Chainsaw Man, which does the same thing. And a lot of people are comparing it to that because it also has the exact same color palette and animation style as season one of the Chainsaw Man anime. It's actually very strange. A lot of people, including myself, were starting to wonder, was Tatsuki Fujimoto just involved in this somehow? Apparently, he has nothing to do with it. So nobody knows why this Chainsmoker Cat show has so much in common with Chainsaw Man. We don't know. But it does look and feel an awful lot like it when it comes to the presentation, and especially that intro. But man, what a freaking cool intro that is. Um, I never thought this would end up being like my second contender this year for best anime of the year after Akane Banashi, but it is. That's how funny I think it is, and also cringe at the same time. Like, just like a show having this level of audacity, much like Panty and Stocking, I just think it's one of those anime that, like, the sheer bravado of how much it commits to being what it is, that alone kind of makes it hard not to watch and laugh at. And it has its own twisted, unhinged charm that has definitely grown on me in just these 2 episodes quite strongly. And again, the animation is actually fantastic. Like when I say it looks like season one of the Chainsaw anime, I mean it really kind of does. Like it has some really cool animated sequences. There's even one sequence in episode two that is like a short stop motion sequence. Like it has some of those cross media moments too in its animation. So like that alone puts it on a high tier. But the fact that it's also just one of the most transgressive anime comedies I've seen in ages, that alone is going to make it one of the most talked about shows of the year. So there's that. Then there's Science Saru, who has been cooking up a storm for the last couple years lately between Dawn to Dawn and, even that Scott Pilgrim anime a couple of years ago. Like, now they're doing a direct adaptation of the original Ghost in the Shell manga, which I have mentioned in previous videos and how much I've been hyped for that. And yeah, the pilot for the Ghost in the Shell manga adaptation is perfect. I mean, there's not much to talk about. It's just perfect. It covers material that I've already kind of peeked at from the original manga in the lead up to this. So there wasn't much that was surprising narratively, but man, the production values, the jazzy soundtrack, the gorgeous animation, and just how well Science Saru has just captured the spirit of Masamune Shiro's original manga, and especially this version of the Major. Everybody loves this version of Major Makoto because we've never had this version of this otherwise iconic character in anime before. We've never seen her like this before. So spunky and sassy and silly. Um, it's awesome. And they even got my all-time favorite voice actress to voice her, Maya Sakamoto. Like, holy shit, man. Uh, that's just like that put it over the top for me because I love her as a singer. I've always loved her as a voice actress. Back in the days of Escaflowne as Hitomi, Raka from Macross Frontier. This is the first time I've seen her play a character like the Major, but she knocks it out of the park, and it's so cool. Uh, so yeah, voice acting's great. Everything's good here. Um, there's not much to talk about except I've heard rumors that this is going to be a 10-episode season. I hope, because I don't believe that's going to be enough to cover the whole manga. Hopefully, we get more seasons in the future. But man, it's good stuff. Good stuff. Because Ghost in the Shell, that's a series that's been stagnating for a while, and I think this is easily the best we've had since Standalone Complex. It brought me back to Adult Swim. That's how good this show is. It brought me back to those days when Ghost in the Shell was still relevant and cool, and it hasn't been in a very long time. So it's a great thing. So another Anime of the Year contender. And that's not all Science Saru has been doing. They've also been busy with another anime premiere this summer called A Witch in Mongolia, which is tonally completely different from Ghost in the Shell. This is a very sobering, very emotional and weighty historical drama. The first episode is actually super warm. It's about this Persian slave girl who gets brought into a very wealthy, noble Iranian family. And the fact that it's set in Iran, the fact that we get this Middle Eastern anime story that's very, it seems very, period accurate. It feels like a lot of research went into this anime. It is based on a manga. So I'm guessing the manga was very well researched because, yeah, the setting and the period details of this anime are very impressive. And it looks and feels unlike anything I've seen before from anime. Because we don't get historical dramas very often from the medium, but especially like in the Middle East. It's set during the Mongol invasion. So you have this girl, she gets taken in by this family. The first episode's very warm, despite that setup, despite the fact that she is a slave. She gets taken in by this very warm family that over time starts to see her as a daughter, like after years of her living there. And it's kind of a warm episode, but then we get to episode two, and without spoiling much, things get very tragic and very heartbreaking very quickly once the Mongols invade, and this girl ends up captured by the Mongols. And boy, it's heavy stuff, man. As far as like heavy drama is concerned, this is definitely one of the bleakest anime of the season so far. But it's carried off extremely well. Like the animation style for this show is unlike anything I've seen before. It's really gorgeous. The character designs are very unique. The Middle Eastern setting is done very nicely. And I am very curious to see where the story goes because yeah, as bleak as the direction for episode 2 gets, it'll be interesting to see like how this girl overcomes this period of history and how she has to survive. And uh, yeah, there's definitely a lot of weight to this show, and it's interesting to see Science Saru tackle something so ambitious. You know, they're really increasing their range as a studio. They're not always about the silly antics of something like Don Don or the current Ghost in the Shell adaptation. They can, you know, tackle all kinds of things. They've always been a very experimental studio to start with, mind you, even going back to something like Devilman Crybaby. But still, I I was surprised by this, and I'm very interested in seeing more. It's another Anime of the Year contender because there's really nothing else like it that I've seen before in this medium. And then we get to Goodbye Lara, which is a retelling of The Little Mermaid, the classic Hans Christian fairy tale. And this one is interesting because basically it takes all the familiar elements that you know of this story. You know, red haired mermaid, uh, undercity kingdom, undersea kingdom, sorry, and a sea witch. Really cool looking sea witch in this show, by the way. Really cool looking. And it tackles all that, her going to the human world and falling in love with a human through a potion given to her by the sea witch and breaking her father's rules about interacting with humans, and all of that's covered in the first episode. And that's what's interesting about this anime is it uses the original story, the original source material, as a jumping off point where this mermaid gets reincarnated, resurrected hundreds of years later into the contemporary times we're in now, in contemporary Japan, because you know this is an anime. Obviously, it's of course it's going to be Japan, but um, yeah. So like that's how the episode ends. It was a nice, shocking twist, and it'll be interesting to see how the rest of this plays out. Like, is it still going to be a love story? Is she still going to fall in love with a human, or the very last scene definitely makes me think it might be going in a couple of interesting possible directions with that. But beautiful animation, very enchanting. It almost gives me Ponyo vibes. It almost gives me Miyazaki vibes. That was another. Ponyo was, of course, another like Little Mermaid kind of retelling, and it kind of gives me those vibes, but a bit more melancholy, a bit more, I guess you could say, a bit more mature than something like that. But you know, yeah, I'm interested to see more. I think it's unique. I think it's nice to see a new take on this story. Obviously, this isn't the first time The Little Mermaid has been tackled by anime, because again, there's Ponyo, but there's also, I think there's one going all the way back to the 70s. Anime has been tackling that a couple of times, I think, but still, this is a fresh, interesting take, and it looks gorgeous. So definitely want to see more of Goodbye Lara. And then we get to Kaiju Girl, which is definitely one of the more interesting rom-coms to come out this year. We've got this young girl falling in love in high school who also has monster blood. She's part kaiju. She's part Godzilla. So she kind of struggles with that aspect of herself when you know, getting the butterflies, the prepubescent heart racing that comes with that stage of life. And every time she gets too excited or overworked or aroused by things, you know, romance or whatever, she grows some Godzilla parts. And by the end of the episode, she turns into a full freaking monster, Godzilla-sized kaiju that nearly destroys her city. So yeah, pretty cool. It's of course a lighthearted comedy, so none of this is taken super seriously. But it is fun because it's obviously a metaphor. I mean, we've had like stuff like this before. even with something like Turning Red. But it's like that with a Godzilla girl instead of Panda Girl. And I love the premise. I think it's very cute. It definitely had me sold by the end of the episode when she actually turned into a full Godzilla kaiju, after, starting to get feelings for one of her classmates. But she's also very sheltered and used to being very, like, alone because everybody kind of calls her Monster Girl or whatever for having part kaiju, you know, parts that pop up every time she gets worked up, like monster hands or spikes coming out of her back or whatever. But by the end of the episode, I really was sold by the whole premise and how funny and fun it is, especially her mom. I love the mother in this show because she basically takes her daughter's kaiju transformations as just like she takes it in stride. It's just like, normal, not necessarily normal, but she treats it as like changes that, a girl goes through. Like, oh, she treats it like it is just normal puberty changes, even though her daughter is a literal kaiju girl. So there's some humor there. I love that. I love the way she reacts to her daughter, and yeah, it's a fun premise. As somebody who adores kaiju, adores Godzilla, taking something like that and putting it into a rom com is definitely, this coming of age story is definitely a fun twist. And while I don't entirely know how an entire season of this show is going to keep that premise going, like her turning into a literal Godzilla every time she gets too worked up and not destroying her own home city, while still being a lighthearted comedy. I don't know how it's going to pull that off for an entire season, but I look forward to finding out. And I know there's already a second episode aired. I've seen the first one so far, but I will definitely watch more. I think it's a very cute show. Maybe not quite on the same, like, groundbreaking level as some of these other shows, these other four that I talked about, but it's still up there as, like, I definitely recommend checking it out. But then we get to a couple of lesser shows, I want to say. There's Red River, which did pique my interest because it's an isekai anime based on an isekai manga from the 90s that never got an anime adaptation. Unfortunately, it suffers from some very bland visuals. It's kind of this year's Night of the Living Cat, where the visuals are just very bland, very flat. It's not a flashy looking show. It doesn't look outright terrible by any means in this first episode I saw, but nothing stands out visually as like super flashy or super impressive, even in the outro for the episode. Having said all that, I think the premise is pretty interesting because it's an isekai anime where this main girl gets transported not to another world, not a fantasy world, but back in time to like this part of history in the Mediterranean or something in like 13 AD or something. I forget the exact year, but 12th century or something like that, a long time ago. And she nearly gets sacrificed to a god and everything. And she's saved by a dashing prince who wants to take her in. And the mysterious, mischievous witch that like summoned her to that time period in the first place. It's very like 90s isekai in the sense that like she doesn't die and get reincarnated like so many isekai slop nowadays. She just gets captured. She gets summoned to this other time period by this witch in this Mediterranean kingdom. And yeah, there's not much to talk about in the first episode aside from the fact that it's just refreshing to see an old school isekai get an anime adaptation right now because again, it doesn't have any of the tropes that modern isekai have nowadays. It feels more sincere. It feels, you know, there's nothing about this first episode that stood out immensely, both visually and narratively, but I am interested in seeing more, especially by the end, by the cool outro. Maybe not visually all that interesting, but like it seems like this could be a good story at least. I heard a lot of people are disappointed in the visuals because apparently the manga is a lot nicer to look at. But I can get past the bland production values if the story ends up being pretty good. And it's nice to see an isekai that has these retro throwback vibes, because personally I like 90s isekai a hell of a lot better than the shit it is now. So Red River is going to hold my attention. I think I will watch more of that. But then we get to Black Torch, the new shonen anime of this summer season. And what's really kind of underwhelming about this show right off the bat is that apparently it's based off of a manga series that got canceled before this adaptation was even made, which really raises some questions as to why it's getting an anime adaptation in the first place, because apparently the manga did not survive. It didn't do well enough. I forget how many volumes were released before it was canceled, but yeah, somebody apparently thought it still needed an anime adaptation, and I don't even know if it has a proper ending. But yeah, I will say it's not hard to guess as to why it might have been canceled, even though I'm only going by the first episode. Black Torch, you have this main character who's very much like an Ichigo from Bleach. He's got the same kind of attitude, except instead of talking to spirits, he talks to animals like stray cats and crows. He's a Dr. Dolittle mixed with Ichigo from Bleach. And we get a lot of like obligatory cliche shonen tropes in this first episode, just right off the bat. Like his introduction with a bunch of bullies under a bridge and how he beats the crap out of them really quickly. And we get that he's the main character right away. And the way he has a grandpa, cranky old grandpa, telling him to keep up with his training and pass on the shinobi lineage that he's a part of. And yeah, and then he meets a black cat in the woods that's wounded. That's actually turns out to not just be another animal, but a special spiritual animal, a mononoke, that's being pursued by other spiritual, powerful mononoke, and he ends up getting embroiled in a big plot where he has to fight one of these Mononoke. They come for the cat that he found, but then he gets impaled, so the cat's got to save his life, and in turn he gets powers and is able to beat up the disposable villain. And you know where this is going. It's all typical shonen stuff that we've seen before. And unfortunately, that is the problem I have with this show, is that even by the end of the episode, it's like another team of shinobis. They're already this organization come to capture him at the end, very even like Chainsaw Man-esque, where they take him in and you know they're going to make some kind of a deal because he has special powers now that he's not supposed to have. But surely enough, he'll end up joining this unit and fighting alongside them, and there'll be some kind of war. It's like typical stuff, very typical cliche stuff. And it's no Chainsaw Man or Dawn to Dawn, which are like the shonen shows that are like blowing me away lately. It just can't compete with those. Even the visuals are fine, but they're not Dawn to Dawn or Chainsaw Man levels of like, holy shit, this is a great looking show. It doesn't do anything bad. It's just, this is one of those shonen shows that is just overly familiar. Very, very overly familiar. And it didn't surprise me in any way. That's not to say I hated it, but again, when you factor in the fact that the manga was canceled after not very long, I am curious as to like how good this might turn out to be, or if there's anything the anime adaptation can do to make it better. I don't know. But I could see this show appealing at the very least to like people who are not as seasoned in shonen anime, who will not be as tired of the tropes. And you know, for me, I've said this many times before, if I'm going to watch a new shonen anime, I feel like you got to have something unique. You have to have a new hook. Dawn to Dawn had that for me. Chainsaw Man had that for me. Those felt like bold new shonen shows that are doing things that I've never seen before in the genre. And unfortunately, Black Torch feels like just another mediocre one that just kind of does what we've seen a million times before. Doesn't do any of it badly, but I do think like this will play better to people who haven't seen a billion of these shows before. Whereas for someone like me, it's kind of the same way I felt about Jujutsu Kaisen. It's like that was a very slick, well-produced show, but it just didn't do anything unique for me. And this feels like another one of those. Only it doesn't have the impeccable animation of Jujutsu Kaisen going for it, which that at least had going for it. I don't think it's going to compete with that either when it comes to fight animation or anything. So It might be the only current summer season show that I've tried that isn't blowing me away in some way, or giving me something to latch on to, like Red River, where at least there's an interesting story. I don't know if I'm going to watch more of that. But otherwise, all the other shows I mentioned are pretty interesting in one way or another. And those four in particular, Goodbye Lara, Witch in Mongolia, The Ghost in the Shell, and Chainsmoker Cat, those in particular, I think are already Anime of the Year contenders now because they're just so A tier, like high tier, uh, blowing me away anime. So those are the ones I recommend the hardest. But overall, pretty interesting season so far. Pretty crackling, interesting season. And I'm excited to see more, man. The summer season is cooking this year. Lots of new and original content, as opposed to last summer, where I think we mostly had just a lot of sequels. Great ones, but I'm happy to see so many interesting new things coming out this summer season. So, yeah. What did you guys think about any of these shows? Have you watched any of them? Are you interested in any of this stuff? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, you get to burning and live for the passion.